So welcome everybody to this latest video on 162 Maths, and in this video we'll be going over some past GCSE exam questions relating to vectors. Now as always, I'll include a link to the questions that we go through in this video in the description below, along with lesson links that go over all the aspects of vectors in greater detail. Now before we get started working through some past exam questions related to vectors, let's just have a quick overview over what it is you need to know and what it is you need to revise. Now regardless of whether you're doing higher or foundation, you need to be able to work with vectors on a diagram and using column vectors. So this is when you've got such diagrams like so, and so here we've got the A and B. Now it's on a diagram, so you may get asked to write down the column vector of A and the column vector of B. Likewise, they may give you a column vector and you need to represent it on a squared grid. Now you also need to understand the concept of negative and reverse vectors. So this is when you are changing the sign. If you want to go in the opposite direction of the column vector, you either need to change the sign of all the numbers or reverse the sign of all the resultant vectors in terms of the letters. You also need to work with vector calculation. So this is when you've got, let's say, A plus B, when you know that A is, let's say, 2, 4, and B is minus 7, 3. And you also need to work with scalar vectors. So if you're working out 3A, which will basically be 3 lots of 2, 4, which will give you an answer of 6, 12. You also need to be able to then move on to is working with diagrams. So this is when you've got something that looks like this particular type of question, where it's not drawn to scale, it's represented as a picture form, and column vectors are represented with their letters only. You also need to be able and be comfortable with working with ratio and proportion, which does prove to be very, very popular, particularly when it comes to high level questions. And then it moves on to vector proof, which is proving that lines are parallel or not parallel, and that points lie on a straight line. All of which of these are going to be covered on this topic test. But if you're wanting to learn more and go into more detail about any of these aspects, then I strongly recommend you check out the lesson links in the description below. Now a little reminder that if you're wanting access or a copy of the questions that we go through in this video, all you need to do is just simply click on the link in the description. So looking at question 1, it says that A is minus 3, 5, B is minus 2, 3, and it's asking us to work out B minus A for 2 marks. Now where the 2 marks are awarded is basically having the correct top value and then having the correct bottom value. So if you can do this in your head, that's absolutely fine. You'll get full marks if it's correct, but you may want to show some working out. So for this, we've got B, which is minus 2, 3, minus A, which is minus 3, 5. So we just need to be careful with negative. So it's going to be minus 2, minus 3, and 3 minus 5. Now, two minuses in the middle become a plus, so that's going to become 1, and the bottom number is going to become minus 2. So the answer then is 1 minus 2. Moving on to question 2, it says work out A plus B plus C. So here I've got 2 minus 10, I've got 6 minus 2, and 4, 1, and I need to add them all together. So 2 plus 6 plus 4 is 12, and minus 10 plus minus 2 plus 1 is minus 11. So the answer then is 12 minus 11. Then for question B, it says show that A plus 4C is parallel to B. Now if it's parallel, basically 4AC is going to be a factor or a multiple of B. So if I first work out what A plus 4C is going to be, so again going back to that, it's going to be 2 minus 10. And that's going to be plus 4 lots of C, which was 4, 1. And so that's going to equal 2 minus 10 plus 16 plus 4. So that's going to equal 18 minus 6. Now if I compare that to B, so B was 6 minus 2, we can see that 3 lots of B is going to equal A plus 4C. Let me just make sure that does look like an A. So therefore, A plus 4C is parallel to B. To be fair, what you could also write is basically this, and that would be fine as well for the 2 marks. Moving on to question 3, it says vectors A and B are drawn on the grid. Write down the column vector that represents A plus B. Now, there's a couple of ways in which you could do this. Well, A we can write as a column vector, which is going to be 3 minus 1. And B is 2, and it's going to be minus 5. So then A plus B is going to be 3 plus 2 minus 1 plus minus 5. So that's going to be 5, and that's going to be minus 6. Alternately, what I could do is draw a straight line going from A to B. Just draw a line from there to here, and then just do the column vector. So this column vector here is going to represent A plus B, because I'm going plus A and then plus B. And then working out the column vector of that, you can see gives me 5 minus 6. So the final answer is going to be 5 minus 6. Now, one question I often get asked in my class is students asking me, will I lose marks if I use square brackets or if I use curve brackets? Generally speaking, you should be using square brackets, but if you were to use curve brackets, it will still be acceptable in the exam. Moving on to question 4a, it says vectors P and Q are drawn on the grid. Write P as in terms of Q. So I want to know how to get from Q to P. Now for this, I need to, in terms of the dimensions, I need to half it, but it's also then going in the opposite direction, so then it needs to be minus. So P is going to equal minus a half Q. Or you can write it as a decimal, like so. Then moving on to 4b, it says vectors C and D are drawn on the grid. On the grid above, draw the vector representing C minus D. Well, again, if you want to use column vectors, C is 1 minus 2, and D is minus, and it's 7, 0. So then C minus D is going to be 1 minus minus 7, and minus 2 minus 0. So that's going to give me 8 minus 2. So then on the grid, if I draw, have a starting point, so it's going to be 8 to the right and then 2 down. So drawing a straight line from one to the other, like so, I get my answer. So that there represents C minus D. Alternatively, what you could do is go from C. So we want C, so that's going to go from there to there. And then we want to go in the opposite direction of D, which is going to end up there. So this is C, this is minus D going in that direction. And then all I then need to do is the final answer needs to be that diagonal line. So again, those will be exactly the same. Where you have it, again, is not going to be a problem as long as it is 8 to the right and 2 down. Then now we move on to looking at the diagram questions. So here it says, here is a triangle ABC. It's not drawn accurately, so there's no column vectors. And it tells us that AB is 3A plus B and AC is 5A minus 2B. The question is asking us to find the vector of B to C. Well, to get from B to C, I'm going to go the route of B to A and then A to C. Now B to A is going against the arrow, so that's going to be minus 3A minus B. And then A to C is going with the arrow, so that's going to be plus 5A minus 2B. So all that's left for me to then do is collect the like terms. So I've got minus 3A plus 5A, which is positive 2A. And then I've got minus B minus 2B, which is minus 3B. So the answer then is 2A minus 3B. It then says for 5b, PQ equals 4BC. Work out the vector of PQ. So substituting this in, what we know is we know that PQ or BC is 2A. So B to C is 2A minus 3B. So then 4BC is going to be 4 lots of 2A minus 3B. So expanding the brackets, I'm going to get 8a minus 12b. Now moving on to question 6, it says 5 points are connected by vectors. It says f to g is equal to 2 lots of e to h, and the question is asking us to work out f to e in terms of a and b. So looking at this first, let's first of all work out what it is we need to know. So here we need to know what e to h is. So ultimately what we're trying to work out is f to e. So ultimately we're wanting to know what that is going in that direction of f to e. Now in order to work that out, what I'm going to need to know is I need to know what f to g is. Now in order to help me work this out, I need to use this bit of information here. So f to g is equal to 2 lots of e to h. So the first thing I need to do is find e to h. Now e to h is going from here to here. So then e to h is going to equal e to d plus d to h. Now e to d is equal to, going with the arrow, so that's going to be minus 8a minus 2b, and that's going to be plus d to h, which is going with the arrow, so that's plus 5a plus 6b. So then simplifying all of those terms, I'm going to get minus 3a plus 4b, which equals e to h. So let me just put a little box around that. So then working out f to g, so knowing that f to g is equal to 2 lots of e to h, so f to g is going to equal minus 6a plus 8b. So if I put a little box around that, then I can label f to g. Well, f to g is that, then g to f is going to be 6a minus 8b. So then going in this direction, that's going to be 6a minus 8b. So then now I've worked out what f to g is, or g to f is, I can then work out what f to e is going to be. Now the route I'm going to go for f to e is going to be, I'm going to go, well actually I don't need to work out the opposite of that one, so let me just get rid of that. And f to g is minus 6a plus 8b. So I'm going to go from f to g and then g to e. So then looking at this and just scrolling down a little bit, I know that f to g is minus 6a plus 8b, and g to e is minus 9b plus a. So then simplifying each of these terms, what do we get? Well, I'm going to get minus 5a. So again, joining these two things here. And then looking at the b's, I've got 8b plus minus 9b, which is minus b. So my final answer then is minus 5a minus b. Now again, make sure you're showing full working out. You can show you working on the diagram, but make sure your arrow's in the right direction and you've got a set plan as to the route that you are going. Sometimes there are multiple ways in which you're doing it, but your final answer should always be the same. Then moving on to question 7. So this is where we are dividing a vector by a ratio. So here it says PQR is a straight line, P to Q to R is in ratio 5 to 1, P to Q is A. So if we know that P to Q is worth 5 parts, and we also know that that is A, so if I just highlight this as being A, then that means that 5 parts is equal to A. So that means that 1 part is going to be 1/5 of A. So going in this direction here, and that's going to be Q to R. So Q to R is going to be 1/5 A. Now the question is asking us to go from R to Q, so it's going in the opposite direction. So that therefore it's going to be minus 1/5 A. Moving on to question 8, it says in a triangle PQR, M is the midpoint of QR, PN to NQ is 2 to 5, RP is 9A, PN is 4B, work out Q to M in terms of A and B. And it says give your answer in its simplest form. So let's have a look at this ratio then. So looking at the ratio, we need to know what P to Q actually is. Now P to Q is going to be looking at this. So we know that P to N is 4B. So that means that 4B, if I just write P to N, is that, and that equals 2 parts. So that means then that one part is going to equal 2B, and 5 parts, which is N to Q, is therefore going to equal 10B. So N to Q is going to be 10B. So then from this, I can then use that to work out what Q to M is going to be. Well, Q to M is equal to Q to R divided by 2. So then if I work out what Q to R is, now Q to R is Q to P and then P to R. So then substituting those in, or Q to P, use a thinner pen. So Q to P is going in the opposite direction, so that's going to be minus 14B. And then we're going against the arrow for P to R, which is minus 9A. So therefore, Q to M is going to be minus 14B minus 9A, all divided by 2, which equals minus 7B minus 4.5A. And there is my final answer for that one. So minus 7B minus 4.5A, or you could write it using fractions as minus 9 over A. So any of those two would be absolutely fine. Moving on to question 9, it says that ABCD is a parallelogram. AF is on a straight line with AF to FC equals 2 to 1. E is the midpoint of the straight line D to C, and AD equals 3B and ED equals A. Work out E to F in terms of A and B. So first of all, let's start by labeling what we know. So we know it's a parallelogram, which means that the opposite sides are going to be equal. So that's going to be 3B going from B to C. And we know that looking at the ratio of A to F to F to C, so that's the diagonal line. So if I just start by labeling that in yellow, then I know that this is related to that. Now it also says that A to D is 3B and E to D is A. Now if E is the midpoint, so using this bit of information here, if this going from E to D is A, then C to E is also going to be A, which means that B to A is going to be 2A. So then from this, we want to work out what A to C is. So A to C is equal to A to D plus D to C. Then from this, what I can then establish is that A to D is 3B and D to C is going to be minus 2A. So A to C is 3B minus 2A. So then what I then need to do is use this ratio and split that up into 3 parts. So 3 parts equals 3B minus 2A. So that means that 1 part is going to equal B minus 2/3 of A. Now F to C is this, so F to C is going to be B minus 2/3 of A, and A to F, which is 2 parts, so let me just write 1 part. A to F is 2 parts, so that's going to be 2 lots of that, so that's going to be 2B minus 4/3 A. So then the question is asking work out E to F. Well, to get from E to F, I'm going to go E to D, and then I'm going to go from D to A, and then I'm going to go A to F. So then substituting each of those 3 in, so E to D I know is A, D to A is minus 3B, and A to F, which I've just worked out, is 2B minus 4/3A. So then all that's left for me to do is then simplify all of these expressions. So I've got A minus 4 over 3a. Well, if I turn this into 3 over 3, it might make it easier for me to subtract, but that's going to be minus a third a. And then I've got minus 3b plus 2b, which gives me minus 1b. So there is my final answer. Moving on to question 10, it says that ABCD is a parallelogram. M is the midpoint of DC and N is the midpoint of AD. AB equals 2A and BC equals 3B. Show that NM is parallel to AC. So let's first of all label what we know. So AB, this whole length here is 2A and B to C is 3B. Now if N and M are midpoints, then D to M is going to equal A and M to C is also going to equal A, and A to N is going to be 1.5B and N to D is going to be 1.5B. So then to work out N to M, I need to work out these bits separately. So N to M, I'm going to go N to D plus D to M. So that's going to equal 1.5B plus A. Then I need to work out what A to C is. Well, to get from A to C, I'm going to go A to B plus B to C. And that's going to be 2A plus 3B. So then looking at this, if I just rearrange, I can see that I've written it in different orders. So here if I write this as A plus 1.5B, and A to C is 2A plus 3B, then one thing I notice, I've got a common multiple. So if I times that by 2 and times that by 2, then what I know is that as AC equals 2 lots of NM, AC is parallel to NM. And there we go. Now, if you do forget the arrows, don't worry too much. As long as your letter's in the correct order, like your first letter is where you start at, second letter is where you end at, then that should be fine. But it is very good practice. Try and remember to write the arrows. Now, moving on to question 11, it says ABC is a triangle, P is the midpoint of AC, Q is the point on BC where B to Q to C is in the ratio of 3 to 1. B to A is 6A, B to C is 8B. Work out P to Q in terms of A and B. Give your answer in its simplest term. So let's have a look at this. So we know that B to A is 6A. So we can label that as 6A. And we know that B to C is 8B. Now looking at this ratio, we know that 4 parts equals 8B. So 1 part is going to equal 2B. Now B to Q is 3 parts, so that's going to be 6B, and Q to C is 1 part, so that's going to be 2B. So then labeling this up, we get 6B and that is 2B. So then once all the vectors are labeled, so we can, we've still not worked out what A to C is. So A to C is going to be A to B plus B to C. And A to C is minus 6A and B to C is 8B. So that means that A to C is going to be minus 6A equals 8B. So all of this length here going in this direction is minus 6A plus 8B. Now if P is midpoint, then that's going to be minus 3A plus 4B, and this is also going to be minus 3A plus 4B. So now everything is labelled in terms of each of the directions. So then going back, and let me just zoom a little bit up so we can see everything there. So P to Q, well, to get from P to Q, I'm going to go P to C plus C to Q. So P to C is minus 3A plus 4B going with the arrow, and then Q to C going against the arrow is minus 2B. Now simplifying all those like terms, I get minus 3A plus 2B, and there is my final answer for that one. Then moving on to questions 11b, it says use your answer in part A to explain why PQ is not parallel to AB. Well, for this, all we need to write is something along the lines of that AB is not a multiple of PQ. And so something along those lines would be absolutely fine. So then moving on to our last question, it says ABC, BPO and OQC are straight lines. Q is the point on OC such that O to Q to C is in the ratio of 1 to 2, and the ratio of the line AB to BC is in the ratio of 1 to 3. OC is 15A, OB is 12B, and AB is 5A minus 4B, and P to B is KB. Given that APQ is a straight line, find the value of Q. You must show you're working out, and it's the 5-mark question. So first things first, let's do our best to try and label as much of this diagram as possible. So we know that A to B is 5A minus 4B. So this length here, going from A to B, if I just highlight it in pink, is going to be 5A minus 4B. Now using this ratio here, that A to B is one part, and that's 5A minus 4B, and B to C is 3 parts, so therefore it's going to be 15A minus 12B. So this length here is 15A minus 12B. Now we also know that O to C is 15A, so all of this is 15A, and if we split that to 3 parts, so 15A equals 3 parts, then 1 part is going to equal 5A. So if O to Q is 1 part, so that's going to be 5A, and this is going to be 10A. Then we also know that O to B is 12B, so all of this is 12B. We know that P to B is KB, so this length here is KB. So then this length is going to be 12B minus KB. So now I've got all my letters represented with vectors. All that's left for me to then do is to work out AP to PQ. Now if APQ is on a straight line, then looking at which one's smaller, then a number, let's just call it X, times AP is going to equal A to Q. Okay, because we've got shared point. So what I need to do is I need to work out individually what those two lengths are. So to work out A to P, well, A to P is going to be A to B plus P to B. So that's going to be 5A plus minus 4B minus KB. And then working out what A to Q is going to be, well, to get from A to Q, I'm going to go A to C and then C to Q. So A to C is a total of 20A minus 16B. And then C to Q is going against the arrow, so it's going to be minus 10A. So, and if I simplify that, I get 10A minus 16B. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to neaten factorize this up. So what I've got is I've got 5A, and then I've got minus, and if I take the B out and factorize with respect to B, I end up with 4 plus K. So then all that's left for me to then do is to compare these two things here. So just writing it again, I get that AQ is equal to 10A minus 16B, and AP is equal to 5A minus 4 plus KB. Now to get from this to this, I've got to multiply by 2. So that means to get from this to this, I need to multiply by 2. So then taking this bit of information out, now I don't need to worry about the minuses because they're both negative. So what I then know is that 2 lots of 4 plus K must equal 16. So therefore 8 plus 2K equals 16. So 2K equals 8, giving me a final answer of that K equals 4. So k equals 4. And there we go.